I'm Grace, 32, and my brother just signed away everything he thought he'd inherited while I sat quietly in the corner, like the family wallflower everyone expected me to be. He actually raised a champagne glass and toasted our dead father. Thank you, Dad, for finally recognizing who really deserves the empire. The clink of crystal against his wedding ring still echoes in my ears. When the lawyer cleared his throat and asked to read the second part of the testament, the champagne flute slipped right out of Derek's manicured fingers. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt completely underestimated by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me back up and tell you how we got to this delicious moment of poetic justice. 3 weeks earlier, I was arranging white lilies in Dad's hospital room when Derek burst through the door like he owned the place, which apparently he thought he did. Grace, you can't keep monopolizing Dad's time, he announced, adjusting his expensive suit jacket. The board members need to discuss transition plans. I looked up from the vase I was arranging. Dad always loved fresh flowers, said they reminded him of Mom's garden. He's your father, Derek, not a quarterly earnings report. Don't be naive. Derek rolled his eyes. Someone has to think practically about the company's future. Dad was barely conscious on pain medication, but Derek was already measuring the office drapes. Classy, right? I'd been there every single day for 6 months, watching Dad fade away from pancreatic cancer, holding his hand through chemo sessions, reading him financial reports when he was too weak to focus on the pages himself. Derek. He showed up twice a week with his wife Melissa, spent 20 minutes making small talk about golf scores, then disappeared to handle urgent business matters. Urgent business matters that apparently included meeting with estate lawyers without telling me. The nurses say you've been sleeping here again, Derek continued, settling into the visitor's chair like he was conducting a board meeting. That's not healthy, Grace. You need to maintain perspective. Perspective. That was Derek's favorite word when he wanted to dismiss anything that required actual emotion or effort. When Mom died 8 years ago, Derek told me I needed perspective about grief. When I graduated summa cum laude with my MBA, he said it was good, but I should keep things in perspective since I'd never run a real business. Dad likes having family around, I said simply, tucking a wayward lily into place. Family, Derek repeated with that patronizing smile he'd perfected in prep school. Grace, you do realize that once Dad passes, you'll need to find your own path, right? The company requires serious leadership. There it was. The assumption that had colored our entire relationship since childhood. Derek was the heir apparent, the chosen one, the son who would carry on Dad's legacy. I was the daughter who could arrange nice flowers and maybe handle some administrative tasks if I was lucky. Dad's eyes fluttered open during Derek's little speech. Even weak and medicated, his gaze was sharp when it landed on his son. Still planning my funeral, Derek? Dad's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of 40 years building an empire from nothing. Derek's cheeks flushed. Dad, I'm just being practical about succession planning. Practical, Dad repeated, his eyes shifting to me. Grace, honey, could you get me some water? As I held the straw to his lips, I caught Derek checking his Rolex. He had a tennis game with potential investors in an hour, because networking was more important than being present for his dying father's final weeks. I've been thinking about legacy, Dad said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been in days. About what really matters. Derek perked up, probably calculating his future net worth. Grace, Dad continued, you remember when you were 12 and found those errors in the quarterly reports? The ones the accounting firm missed? I nodded. Dad used to bring work home sometimes, and I'd gotten curious about the numbers that didn't add up. Turned out, a junior accountant had been skimming small amounts from multiple accounts. My attention to detail had saved the company thousands. She's always been detail-oriented, Derek said dismissively. But detail work isn't the same as strategic leadership. Dad's hand found mine on the bed rail. His grip was surprisingly firm. No, it's not the same. It's better. Derek's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to Dad contradicting his assumptions about family hierarchy. The company needs vision, Derek pressed. Innovation, bold decision-making. The company needs someone who understands its soul, Dad replied quietly. Someone who knows that numbers tell stories about people's lives. Someone who remembers that behind every profit margin are families depending on the jobs we provide. I saw Derek's expression shift from confident to concerned. This wasn't going according to his script. Dad, you're tired, Derek said, standing abruptly. We should let you rest. Grace, don't keep him up too late with your flower arranging. After Derek left, Dad was quiet for a long time. Finally, he squeezed my hand. Gracie, I need you to promise me something. anything, Dad. Promise me you won't let anyone convince you that you're not capable of anything you set your mind to. I thought he was just being encouraging, the way dying parents try to build up their children's confidence. I had no idea he was preparing me for the biggest surprise of my life. The funeral was everything Derek had orchestrated down to the last detail. Black marble, white roses, and a reception that felt more like a corporate networking event than a goodbye to our father. Derek played the role of grieving son perfectly, accepting condolences while subtly reminding everyone that he'd be taking over the company. Richard would be so proud, Mrs. Patterson from the country club whispered to me. Derek has his father's business instincts. I smiled and nodded, because that's what good daughters do at funerals. We don't point out that Dad's business instincts included actually caring about his employees, not just their productivity metrics. Grace is devastated, of course, I heard Derek telling a group of board members near the memorial display. She was always Daddy's little girl. This transition will be especially hard on her. Daddy's little girl. At 32, with an MBA and 6 years of quietly handling Dad's personal business affairs, I was still being reduced to a sentimental child who couldn't handle adult responsibilities. Derek's wife, Melissa, materialized beside me, her expression perfectly calibrated for public sympathy. How are you holding up? Grace, this must be so overwhelming. I'm managing, I replied evenly. Derek's been worried about you, she continued, lowering her voice to confidential. All this stress, and now having to think about your future. Have you given any thought to what you might do next? What I might do next? As if Dad's death had suddenly rendered me unemployed from a hobby, not bereaved from losing the most important person in my life. I'm sure something will work out, I said, because explaining that I'd been handling Dad's estate planning for 3 years would require more emotional energy than I had available. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, approached our small group with the solemn expression of someone about to discuss money at a funeral. Derek, Grace, when you're ready, we should schedule the reading of the will. Perhaps early next week? Of course, Derek said, his hand automatically moving to straighten his tie. I assume it's fairly straightforward? Mr. Henderson's pause was almost imperceptible. We'll discuss everything in detail at the appropriate time. I caught something in his tone that Derek missed. A carefulness that suggested the will might not be quite as straightforward as my brother assumed. I'll have my assistant coordinate with your office, Derek continued. I imagine Grace will want to be there for the family provisions, even though the business matters won't really concern her. Again, that assumption, that the business Dad had built from nothing, the company I'd watched him nurture through late nights and difficult decisions, was somehow outside my sphere of interest or capability. Actually, Mr. Henderson said carefully, I believe Grace will find the business provisions quite relevant to her circumstances. Derek's smile faltered slightly. Relevant how? We'll cover everything comprehensively next week, the lawyer replied diplomatically, then moved away to pay his respects to other mourners. That night, alone in Dad's house for the first time since his death, I sat in his study surrounded by 40 years of business records, family photos, and personal mementos. The room smelled like his cologne and the leather-bound books he'd collected but never had time to read. Derek had offered to help me clean out Dad's personal effects, which I knew translated to making sure nothing valuable got overlooked or improperly distributed. I'd politely declined his assistance. On Dad's desk, I found a sealed envelope with my name written in his distinctive handwriting. Inside was a letter dated just 2 weeks before his death. My dearest Grace, it began. If you're reading this, then the conversation I've been dreading has become unavoidable. By now, Derek has probably made it clear what he expects his inheritance to include. I need you to understand that what people expect and what actually happens are sometimes very different things. My hands trembled as I continued reading. You've spent your entire adult life believing that success means being quiet, accommodating, and grateful for whatever scraps of recognition come your way. You've watched Derek assume authority that was never rightfully his, and you've accepted it because you thought that was your role in this family. The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing memories I'd forgotten, times when Dad had specifically asked for my input on major business decisions, moments when Derek's supposed business acumen had actually created problems that I'd quietly helped solve. I've made many mistakes as a father, Dad continued. The biggest was allowing Derek to believe that inheritance is about genetics rather than capability. Tomorrow, you'll discover that I've spent considerable time ensuring the company's future is placed in the hands of the person most qualified to protect it. The final paragraph made my chest tight with emotion and anticipation in equal measure. Grace, you have never needed anyone's permission to be extraordinary. You've just been waiting for someone to notice that you already are. Consider this my formal notice. The world is about to discover what I've known all along, that you're not just capable of running this company, you're the only person who truly understands what it means to honor the legacy we've built together. I read the letter 3 times before the full implications settled in. Dad hadn't just included me in his will as an afterthought or family obligation. He'd been planning something much bigger, something that would change everything Derek thought he knew about his future. Have you ever experienced that moment when you realize your entire life is about to transform? When everything you thought was impossible suddenly becomes inevitable? The will reading was scheduled for 2 p.m. on Tuesday. I had 3 days to prepare for what promised to be the most interesting family meeting in our history. Tuesday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that Dad always said was perfect for making important decisions. The law office smelled like mahogany and old money, the kind of environment where fortunes are decided and family dynamics are permanently altered. Derek arrived 15 minutes early, naturally. He'd brought Melissa for moral support and wore his most expensive suit, the one he'd bought for closing the Peterson acquisition. He was treating this like just another business meeting where he'd walk away with what he wanted. I arrived precisely on time, carrying only my purse and Dad's letter, which I'd read so many times I could recite it from memory. Derek barely acknowledged me beyond a perfunctory morning grace, as he reviewed what looked like prepared statements on legal letterhead. I had my attorney review the standard inheritance protocols, he explained to Mr. Henderson as we settled into the conference room. Just want to ensure we handle everything efficiently. Mr. Henderson nodded politely. I appreciate your preparation, Derek. Though I should mention that your father's will contains some unique provisions that may require additional discussion. Unique how? Melissa asked, her voice sharpening slightly. We'll address everything systematically, the lawyer replied, opening a thick folder. Shall we begin? Derek straightened his tie and reached for his gold pen, the one he used for signing important contracts. He was ready to claim his inheritance with the same confidence he'd shown since childhood when dividing birthday cake, or choosing the best Halloween candy from our shared haul. Mr. Henderson began with the standard legal language, the whereases and heretofores that make lawyers sound important and everyone else feel excluded. Then he reached the substantive provisions. To my son, Derek, he read, I leave the following: my watch collection, my golf clubs, my membership to the Riverside Country Club, and the amount of $50,000. Derek nodded approvingly. Those were clearly the personal items. The real inheritance would come next. Additionally, Mr. Henderson continued, Derek will inherit the family cabin in Vermont, along with all furnishings and recreational equipment therein. Derek smiled. He'd always loved that cabin, but I could see him waiting for the main event. The company, the investments, the real wealth that would secure his future as Dad's business successor. To my daughter Grace, Mr. Henderson read next, I leave my grandmother's jewelry collection, all family photographs and personal mementos, and the amount of $50,000. So far, everything was exactly what Derek had expected. Personal items for both children, equal monetary gifts, with the real estate and business assets presumably coming next. Derek reached for his pen again. Now, Mr. Henderson said, his tone shifting slightly, we come to the business assets and primary estate provisions. Derek leaned forward, ready to accept his destiny as head of Morrison Industries. I leave Morrison Industries in its entirety, including all subsidiaries, real estate holdings, investment portfolios, and business assets to my daughter Grace Morrison, who has demonstrated the vision, integrity, and capability necessary to honor the legacy I've built. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the air conditioning humming in the building's ventilation system. Derek's pen remained frozen halfway to the signature line of whatever document he'd been prepared to sign. I'm sorry, Derek said finally, his voice carefully controlled. Could you repeat that last part? Mr. Henderson looked up from the will with professional composure. Morrison Industries and all associated assets are left to Grace. Derek's face went through several color changes. Pale white, then flushed red, then a sickly green that matched his tie. There must be some mistake. There's no mistake, Mr. Henderson replied gently. Your father was very specific about this provision. However, there is a conditional clause that requires additional explanation. Conditional clause. Now things were about to get really interesting. Grace inherits full ownership and control of Morrison Industries, the lawyer continued, with one stipulation. Derek will retain his current position as regional sales director, reporting directly to Grace as CEO, for a minimum period of 2 years. His salary and benefits will remain unchanged, provided he fulfills his employment obligations professionally and without interference in company operations. The room was so quiet you could have heard a stock ticker tape drop. Derek's prepared inheritance document sat forgotten on the table as he processed what had just happened. He hadn't just failed to inherit the company, he'd been demoted to being his little sister's employee. "This is ridiculous," Melissa whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Richard was obviously not in his right mind when he wrote this. "Mrs. Morrison," Mr. Henderson said firmly, "I can assure you that your father-in-law was completely lucid when he finalized this will. In fact, he specifically anticipated questions about his mental capacity and included additional documentation to verify his competency." Derek finally found his voice. "What additional documentation?" Mr. Henderson pulled out another folder. "Psychological evaluations from 2 independent specialists, both conducted within the last 6 months, medical assessments confirming his mental acuity, and recorded video testimony explaining his reasoning for these inheritance decisions." Video testimony. Dad had literally created evidence to prevent Derek from challenging the will. Even from beyond the grave, he'd outmaneuvered his son's assumptions about who deserved control. "I want to see that video," Derek demanded. "Certainly. Though I should warn you, your father was quite explicit about his concerns regarding your business judgment and leadership capabilities." Derek's jaw clenched. He was learning in real time that confidence isn't the same thing as competence, and that assumptions about inheritance based on birth order don't always align with parental assessment of actual qualifications. I sat there absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened, trying to process the fact that I'd just inherited a multi-million-dollar company that I'd been told my entire life was beyond my capabilities. What do you think Derek's next move will be? Drop your predictions in the comments below, because this family drama is just getting started. The video testimony was everything I'd expected and more. Dad, looking frail but sharp-minded, sitting in his hospital bed just 3 weeks before his death, explaining his decision with the methodical precision that had built Morrison Industries from a small manufacturing company into a regional powerhouse. Derek has spent his entire career assuming that authority comes from entitlement rather than achievement, Dad said directly into the camera. He's never originated a successful business strategy, never solved a complex operational problem, and never demonstrated the patience necessary for long-term growth. His sales numbers are adequate because I assigned him our most established client relationships. Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair as his father's recorded voice continued dismantling his professional reputation with surgical precision. Grace, on the other hand, has been quietly handling complex business challenges for years. She restructured our vendor payment systems, identified cost savings that improved our profit margins by 8%, and has been managing my personal business affairs with exceptional competence. I'd forgotten about some of those projects. Tasks Derek had dismissed as administrative busy work when Dad mentioned them at family dinners. Apparently, Dad had been paying closer attention to my contributions than I'd realized. "The decision to make Derek report to Grace as an employee is not punitive," Dad continued. "It's educational. Perhaps working under genuinely effective leadership will teach him the humility and work ethic he's never developed." The lawyer paused the video. Derek's face had progressed from red to purple, and Melissa looked like she wanted to throw something expensive at the wall. "This is character assassination," Derek sputtered. Dad was obviously bitter about his illness, taking out his frustrations on family members who were trying to support him. "Support him how?" I asked quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken since the inheritance reading began, and my voice sounded steadier than I felt. "By showing up twice a week to discuss your golf game? By scheduling business meetings while he was receiving chemotherapy?" "I was handling critical company operations," Derek shot back. "Someone had to maintain client relationships while you were playing nursemaid." Playing nursemaid. There it was again. Derek's automatic dismissal of anything that required emotional intelligence or genuine care as somehow less important than his version of business leadership. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should review the practical implications of these inheritance provisions. Grace, as the new owner and CEO, you'll need to make several immediate decisions about company operations." I pulled out a leather folder I'd brought with me. While Derek had been preparing standard inheritance paperwork, I'd been reviewing 6 months of company financial records that Dad had given me access to during his illness. "Actually," I said, opening the folder, "I've already identified several operational improvements that should be implemented immediately." Derek's laugh was sharp and dismissive. "Grace, you can't just waltz into a CEO position and start making changes. Running a company requires experience with strategic planning, risk management, personnel decisions." "You mean like the strategic planning that led to the Henderson account disaster last quarter?" I interrupted, pulling out a specific report. "When you promised delivery timelines we couldn't meet and cost us a $2 million client relationship?" Derek's mouth opened and closed without sound emerging. He'd clearly forgotten that I'd been copied on all the incident reports Dad received about that particular fiasco. Or the risk management expertise you demonstrated when you authorized the Colorado expansion without proper market research? The expansion that lost us $400,000 before Dad quietly shut it down? Melissa reached over and placed a restraining hand on Derek's arm as he started to stand up. She could see this confrontation wasn't going in their favor. As for personnel decisions, I continued, I assume you're referring to your recommendation to fire Janet Morris from accounting because she questioned your expense reports? The same Janet who discovered the billing errors that saved us $60,000 in overpayments to vendors? Mr. Henderson watched this exchange with the fascination of someone witnessing a chess match where one player had just discovered they'd been playing checkers the entire time. Grace, Derek said through gritted teeth, you're cherry-picking isolated incidents to make yourself look competent. I smiled. There's something deeply satisfying about responding to years of condescension with actual facts and documentation. Derek, I'm not trying to make myself look competent. I'm demonstrating that I am competent. There's a difference. I pulled out another set of documents. For instance, did you know that the client retention analysis I completed for Dad last year identified 12 at-risk accounts? And that the intervention strategies I recommended helped retain 11 of them, preserving approximately $1.8 million in annual revenue? Derek had gone very quiet. So had Melissa. Or that the operational efficiency study I conducted identified redundancies in our manufacturing process that could reduce production costs by 12% without affecting quality or delivery schedules? Mr. Henderson leaned forward with interest. You've been conducting operational analyses for Morrison Industries? For the past 3 years, I confirmed. Dad asked me to review different aspects of the business and provide recommendations. I assumed it was just to help me understand the company better. Apparently, it was actually a job interview. The longest job interview in corporate history, and I'd apparently passed with flying colors. Derek finally found his voice again. Even if you've done some analysis work, that's not the same as running an entire company. You have no experience with leadership, with managing employees, with the day-to-day pressures of executive decision-making. You're right, I agreed. I don't have experience running a company, but I do have experience working with Dad to understand every aspect of this business, from ground-level operations to strategic planning. I know our employees' names, their strengths, their concerns about company direction. When's the last time you spent time on the manufacturing floor talking to people who actually make our products? Derek's silence was answer enough. I also know, I continued, that our best sales rep, Patricia Chen, has been considering an offer from our biggest competitor, and that our head of manufacturing, Tom Rodriguez, has been frustrated with communication gaps between sales and production that have led to unrealistic customer promises. I'd learned both of those things during my daily visits to Dad's office, when employees felt comfortable sharing their concerns with someone who actually listened to them. These are exactly the kinds of operational challenges that require immediate attention from leadership, I said. And fortunately, I've been preparing solutions to present to the new CEO. I paused for effect, smiling at Derek's increasingly uncomfortable expression. That would be me, by the way. Have you ever felt completely underestimated and then had the perfect opportunity to prove everyone wrong? Because what happens next is going to be absolutely satisfying. The first Monday morning of my new life as CEO arrived with the kind of crisp October sunshine that makes everything feel possible. I'd spent the weekend reviewing personnel files, financial projections, and operational reports, preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most challenging conversation of my professional life. Derek had requested a private meeting before the company-wide announcement, probably hoping to negotiate some kind of face-saving arrangement that would preserve his dignity. I'd agreed to meet him in Dad's office, my office now, though the transition still felt surreal. He arrived at 8 sharp carrying a leather briefcase and wearing what I'd learned to recognize as his serious business expression, the same look he'd worn when trying to convince Dad to acquire that failing textile company in North Carolina. Grace, he began, settling into the chair across from Dad's massive oak desk. I've been thinking about this situation over the weekend. I'm sure you have, I replied, arranging the morning's priority reports in neat stacks. One thing Dad had taught me: preparation and organization communicate competence before you even speak. Look, I know you think you're ready for this, but running a company is more complicated than you realize. Derek's tone was patronizing in that carefully modulated way he'd perfected over the years. The stress, the responsibility, the constant decision-making, it's not like the project work you've been doing. I looked up from my paperwork. Derek, what exactly do you think I've been doing for the past 3 years? Administrative tasks, analysis, support work? He waved his hand dismissively. Important work, certainly, but not the same as strategic leadership. Strategic leadership, I repeated. Like your strategy to expand into the Colorado market without researching local regulations? Or your strategic decision to promise the Henderson account delivery schedules that our production team couldn't meet. Derek's jaw tightened. You can't run a company by dwelling on past mistakes. You're absolutely right, I agreed, which is why we need to focus on preventing future ones. Speaking of which, I've scheduled a meeting with Patricia Chen for this afternoon to discuss her concerns about the Parker Industries offer. Derek's eyes widened slightly. How did you know about that? Because I pay attention to our employees instead of treating them like background noise. I pulled out Patricia's file. She's been our top sales performer for 3 years running, and she's considering leaving because she feels undervalued and excluded from strategic discussions. Patricia's fine, Derek said quickly. She's just negotiating for a better commission structure. Actually, she's negotiating with Parker Industries for a senior sales manager position that would double her salary and give her equity participation. I opened the file to show Derek the competitive offer I'd discovered. An offer that our current compensation structure can't match, unless we make some creative adjustments to her role and responsibilities. Derek stared at the document. Where did you get this? Patricia brought it to me Friday afternoon. Apparently, she trusts me enough to discuss her career concerns honestly instead of just walking away without notice. The truth was, Patricia had come to me because she'd watched me support Dad through his illness and had seen how I interacted with employees at company events. Unlike Derek, who treated staff like furniture that occasionally required maintenance, I'd spent years learning people's names, asking about their families, and actually listening to their professional concerns. What did you tell her? Derek asked. That I'd review her situation and get back to her by Wednesday with a comprehensive response. I closed Patricia's file. Which leads to our first official executive decision, Derek. Our decision? Your decision? Actually, as regional sales director reporting to me, I need you to recommend how we should restructure our sales team compensation to retain top performers while maintaining profitability margins. Derek looked like I'd just asked him to solve calculus problems in ancient Greek. That's not really my area of expertise. Sales compensation isn't your area of expertise? I raised an eyebrow. Derek, you've been in sales for 8 years. If you don't understand how commission structures work, what exactly has been your contribution to this company? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Derek was just realizing he'd started himself. I handle client relationships, he said finally. Strategic partnerships. High-level negotiations. Excellent. Then you'll be able to explain to me why our client retention rate has dropped 6% over the past 2 years, while our customer satisfaction scores have declined in 4 out of 5 service categories. I pulled out another report. This one marked with red tabs indicating declining performance metrics. Dad had been tracking these trends for months, growing increasingly concerned about the direction of Derek's sales division. Those numbers are affected by market conditions, Derek protested. Industry-wide trends, economic factors beyond our control. Interesting theory. Except our main competitor, Parker Industries, has increased their market share by 12% during the same time period. I turned the report so Derek could see the comparative analysis. Same market, same economic factors, better results. Derek's confident expression was evaporating like morning fog in sunlight. For the first time in our professional relationship, he was being held accountable for actual performance data rather than being evaluated on charm and family connections. Grace, you're micromanaging details that don't reflect the bigger picture. Derek, I'm examining details that create the bigger picture. I stood up and walked around the desk to sit in the chair beside him, the way Dad used to do when he wanted to have serious conversations. Let me ask you something honest. When was the last time you generated a new client relationship? Not inherited one from Dad's network, not maintained an existing account, but actually identified and secured a new business partnership? Derek was quiet for a long moment. Client development is a complex process. It takes time to build relationships. It's been 3 years, I interrupted gently. 3 years since you brought in a new client that generated meaningful revenue for this company. The statement settled between us like a medical diagnosis that neither of us wanted to hear, but both of us needed to acknowledge. What are you saying, Grace? I'm saying that effective immediately, your role is going to change. You'll continue as regional sales director, but with specific performance metrics and accountability measures. Patricia Chen will be promoted to senior sales manager with expanded responsibilities for new client development. And you'll be working directly with me on a professional development plan to improve your actual sales capabilities. Derek's face went through several color changes. You're demoting me. I'm defining your job responsibilities clearly for the first time in your career. I smiled. Think of it as professional education. The kind Dad apparently hoped you'd develop naturally, but realized needed more structured encouragement. Derek stood up abruptly, his briefcase clutched tightly in his white-knuckled grip. This is humiliating. Derek, this is accountability. There's a difference. As he reached the door, I called after him. Oh, and Derek? The company-wide announcement about the ownership transition is scheduled for 10 o'clock this morning. I'll need you there to demonstrate your support for the new leadership structure. He paused with his hand on the doorknob. And if I refuse? Then you'll be proving that your employment here is incompatible with company success? I replied evenly, which would make terminating your position much easier to justify. Derek left without another word, probably to call Melissa and explain how his little sister had just outmaneuvered him in the first round of their new professional relationship. I sat there in Dad's chair, surrounded by the challenges and opportunities of running Morrison Industries, feeling simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. Everything I'd been told was impossible was now simply my Tuesday morning to-do list. What do you think happens when the rest of the company learns about their new CEO? Because Derek's reaction was just the warm-up act. The company-wide announcement was scheduled in our main conference room, which could hold about 50 people when packed efficiently. I'd asked our office manager, Sandra, to send out the meeting notice Friday afternoon with minimal details. Just important company update from new leadership. By 9:45 a.m., the room was buzzing with speculation and nervous energy. Employees filled every chair and lined the walls, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. Morrison Industries had never held an all-hands meeting on short notice unless something significant was happening. Derek arrived exactly at 10 o'clock, taking a seat in the back row like a student hoping to avoid being called on by the teacher. His expression was carefully neutral, though I could see the tension in his shoulders and the way he gripped his coffee cup. I walked to the front of the room carrying Dad's worn leather portfolio, the same one he'd used for important meetings throughout my childhood. Inside were the notes I'd prepared over the weekend, though I'd memorized most of what I wanted to say. Good morning, everyone. My voice carried clearly through the room, stronger and more confident than I'd expected. I know you're wondering about the reason for this meeting, so I'll get straight to the point. I paused, looking around the room at faces I'd been seeing for years during my visits to Dad's office. Patricia Chen sat in the front row, her expression attentive but guarded. Tom Rodriguez from manufacturing nodded encouragingly from the middle section. Sandra, who'd been Dad's administrative assistant for 15 years, smiled with what looked like anticipation. As you know, my father's death last week marked the end of an era for Morrison Industries. What you might not know is that he spent considerable time preparing for this transition, including making some decisions that might surprise you. I opened the portfolio and pulled out a copy of the inheritance documents, holding them where everyone could see. Effective immediately, I am the new owner and CEO of Morrison Industries. The silence that followed was profound. I watched employees process this information with expressions that ranged from shock to confusion to what looked suspiciously like relief. I know this is unexpected, I continued. Many of you probably assumed Derek would inherit the company, given traditional expectations about family succession. I caught Derek shifting uncomfortably in his back row seat. However, my father made this decision based on his assessment of who was best qualified to preserve the company's values while ensuring its continued growth and success. Patricia raised her hand tentatively. Grace, no offense, but do you have experience running a company? That's an excellent question. Patricia. And the honest answer is no. I don't have experience as a CEO, but I do have 3 years of experience analyzing every aspect of this company's operations, working directly with Dad to understand our challenges and opportunities. I walked closer to the front row, adopting the conversational tone Dad had always used when addressing employees. More importantly, I have a clear vision for our future that builds on the foundation Dad established. I know each of your names, your roles, your contributions to our success. I understand that our company's strength comes from our people, not just our profit margins. Tom Rodriguez spoke up from the middle section. What about Derek? What's his role going to be? I glanced toward the back row, where Derek was studying his coffee cup with intense concentration. Derek will continue as Regional Sales Director, reporting to me as CEO. His experience with our established client relationships will be valuable as we work to strengthen our market position. It was diplomatic language for what everyone in the room probably understood. Derek had been demoted from heir apparent to middle management employee. I want to be transparent with all of you about my priorities, I continued, pulling out another document. First, we're going to address compensation and advancement opportunities that reflect your actual contributions. Patricia, I'd like to discuss your promotion to Senior Sales Manager after this meeting. Patricia's face lit up with surprise and gratitude. Around the room, I saw other employees exchanging glances that suggested this was the kind of recognition they'd been hoping for, but not receiving. Second, we're implementing new communication protocols that ensure your concerns and suggestions reach leadership instead of getting lost in bureaucratic layers. Tom, I want to hear your recommendations for improving coordination between sales and production. Tom nodded enthusiastically. These were conversations he'd been trying to have for months with limited success. Third, we're establishing professional development programs that help employees advance their careers while strengthening their value to the company. Training, education support, mentorship opportunities, investments in people that pay dividends in loyalty and performance. I could see Derek in my peripheral vision, his expression growing more uncomfortable as I outlined initiatives that highlighted everything his leadership approach had lacked. Finally, I said, we're going to modernize our operational systems to improve efficiency and reduce the kind of administrative bottlenecks that create frustration for employees and clients alike. Sandra practically beamed at this announcement. She'd been requesting system upgrades for 2 years without success. I know change can be unsettling, I continued, especially when it happens quickly. But I want you to understand that these changes are designed to strengthen this company, not disrupt it. Dad built Morrison Industries on principles of integrity, quality, and respect for the people who make our success possible. Those principles aren't changing. I closed the portfolio and looked around the room one final time. What is changing is our commitment to living up to those principles in our daily operations. We're going to become the kind of company that people are proud to work for, not just grateful to have a job with. The applause started slowly, with Sandra and Tom, then spread through the room as employees realized this transition might actually improve their professional lives rather than complicate them. As people began filing out of the conference room, many stopped to congratulate me or ask follow-up questions about specific initiatives. Patricia waited until the crowd thinned before approaching. Grace, I can't tell you how much this means to me. The promotion, yes, but also feeling like someone finally understands what we've been dealing with. What we've been dealing with, I repeated, emphasizing the we. Patricia, as of today, we're partners in making this company successful. Your insights about sales operations are going to be crucial for our growth. Derek had slipped out during the applause without speaking to anyone. I wasn't surprised. This meeting had probably felt like watching his professional obituary being read aloud. But as I stood in that conference room, surrounded by employees who seemed energized rather than apprehensive about their future, I realized something important. I wasn't just inheriting Dad's company. I was finally becoming the leader I'd always been capable of being. The real work was just beginning. But for the first time in my life, I felt completely prepared for the challenges ahead. Tomorrow would bring Derek's inevitable attempts to undermine my authority, board members who might question my qualifications, and clients who would need reassurance about leadership continuity. But today I was exactly where I belonged. If you've ever had to prove yourself in a situation where everyone doubted your capabilities, you know that feeling of finally getting to show what you're really made of. Drop a comment if you're ready to see how Grace handles Derek's next move, because family drama in the corporate world is about to get very interesting. Derek's revenge came in the form of a surprise board meeting he'd called for Thursday morning without consulting me. I discovered this delightful development when I arrived at the office to find 3 board members seated in our conference room, looking uncomfortable and checking their watches. "Grace," Derek said as I entered, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Thanks for joining us. I thought it would be helpful to have a frank discussion about the company's transition period." Frank discussion. In corporate speak, that usually means someone's about to get professionally assassinated in front of witnesses. "Of course," I replied, settling into the chair at the head of the table. Dad's chair. My chair now, though Derek had clearly been hoping I'd take one of the side seats like a junior executive being called to account. Board member Margaret Walsh shifted nervously in her seat. "Grace, we want to support you during this transition. But Derek has raised some concerns about operational continuity." Operational continuity. Derek had been busy over the weekend, apparently, crafting corporate buzzwords to disguise his wounded ego as professional concern. "What specific concerns?" I asked, opening my leather portfolio and pulling out the weekly operational reports I'd prepared. Being prepared for ambush meetings was becoming a useful skill. "Well," Margaret continued, glancing at Derek for support, "there's the question of client relationships. Derek has been our primary point of contact with major accounts for years. There's concern about maintaining those partnerships during leadership changes." Derek leaned forward, sensing his moment. "I've already received calls from 3 clients expressing uncertainty about the company's direction. They're comfortable with me, but they don't know you in a business capacity." "Which clients?" I asked calmly. Derek's pause was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. "The Henderson Group, Morrison Technologies, and Parker Industries." Interesting choices. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through recent call logs. That's fascinating, Derek, because I spoke with Jennifer Henderson yesterday afternoon. She called to congratulate me on the promotion and confirm our quarterly review meeting next week. I showed the call log to Margaret. She specifically mentioned being impressed with the operational analysis I'd provided Dad last month. Derek's confident expression flickered slightly. As for Morrison Technologies, I continued, David Morrison sent flowers to the funeral with a note saying he looked forward to working with Dad's daughter who'd impressed him so much during the contract negotiations. I pulled out the card, which I'd brought specifically in case Derek tried this particular strategy. And Parker Industries? Board member Robert Chen asked. Parker Industries hasn't been our client for 8 months, I replied evenly. They terminated their contract after Derek promised delivery schedules our production team couldn't meet. Patricia Chen, our new senior sales manager, is actually in discussions about potentially winning them back. The silence that followed was the sound of Derek's credibility evaporating in real time. Margaret Walsh looked like she'd just realized she'd been called to a meeting under false pretenses. Derek, Robert said carefully, you told us these were current clients with immediate concerns. They are concerns, Derek insisted, his voice rising slightly. Grace has no experience with high-level client relations. She's been doing administrative work, not strategic business development. I smiled. There's something deeply satisfying about responding to desperation with documentation. Actually, Derek, let me share some strategic business development with the board. I pulled out another folder. Over the past 3 years, I've been conducting market analysis and identifying expansion opportunities that Dad asked me to research. I distributed copies of a comprehensive report I'd prepared. This analysis identified potential new markets worth approximately $2.8 million in annual revenue, along with operational improvements that could reduce costs by 15%. Margaret flipped through the pages, her eyebrows raising with each section. Grace, this is remarkably thorough. Have these recommendations been implemented? Some of them. Dad approved the vendor consolidation strategy, which has already saved us $40,000 this quarter. The expansion recommendations were waiting for new leadership approval. I paused, looking directly at Derek. Dad wanted to see how the new CEO would handle strategic planning before moving forward with major initiatives. Robert Chen closed his copy of the report with an expression that suggested he was reassessing everything Derek had told him about my qualifications. Derek, he said slowly, you've been working here for 8 years. Have you ever produced strategic analysis of this quality? Derek's jaw worked silently for a moment. Strategy isn't just about analysis. It's about implementation, leadership, decision-making under pressure. You're absolutely right, I agreed. Which brings us to implementation. Margaret, I'd like board approval to move forward with the expansion into the Atlanta market. My analysis indicates we could secure 3 new clients within 6 months, generating approximately $800,000 in first-year revenue. Margaret looked impressed despite herself. What would implementation require? Initial investment of $200,000 for equipment and personnel, with break-even projected in month 8. I've identified potential hires and established relationships with local suppliers. Derek's face had progressed through several color changes during this presentation. You can't just dive into major expansion without proper experience. Derek, Robert interrupted, did you review this analysis before Grace presented it? I wasn't included in strategic planning discussions, Derek admitted. Because Dad specifically excluded you, I added gently. He felt your input would be counterproductive to long-term planning. The board meeting that Derek had called to undermine my authority was becoming a demonstration of exactly why Dad had chosen me over him for leadership. Margaret and Robert were looking at Derek with the kind of expression usually reserved for salespeople who'd oversold their qualifications. Grace, Margaret said finally, I think it's clear that your father made his decision based on careful evaluation of leadership capabilities. The board supports your vision for the company's future. Derek stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is a mistake. You'll all see that running a company requires more than impressive reports and analysis. Derek, I said as he reached the door, your next sales report is due Friday. I'll need detailed updates on your current client communications and progress toward quarterly targets. He paused with his hand on the doorknob, probably realizing that for the first time in his career, someone was actually going to hold him accountable for measurable results. After Derek left, the remaining board members seemed genuinely enthusiastic about the company's direction. We spent another hour reviewing implementation timelines and discussing my plans for quarterly performance reviews. As the meeting ended, Robert Chen lingered behind. Grace, I have to ask, how long have you been preparing for this transition? I thought about Dad's letter, about the years of training I hadn't recognized as preparation for leadership. Apparently my entire life. I just didn't know it until last week. What do you think will happen next? Will Derek accept his new role? Or is he planning something even more dramatic? Drop your predictions in the comments, because this sibling rivalry is about to reach a whole new level. By Friday afternoon, Derek's latest strategic move became clear when our biggest client, Hartwell Manufacturing, called to schedule an urgent meeting regarding account continuity concerns. The timing wasn't coincidental. Derek had obviously been making phone calls all week, planting seeds of doubt about my ability to maintain service quality. I arrived at Hartwell's offices Friday at 2 p.m., carrying a comprehensive presentation I'd prepared overnight. If Derek wanted to test my client relations skills, I'd give him a masterclass in preparation and professionalism. Grace? David Hartwell greeted me in the lobby, his expression cautiously optimistic. I appreciate you coming on short notice. I wanted to discuss some concerns Derek shared with me about the transition period. Derek's concerns. Of course. I'm glad you called, David. Transitions can be unsettling, and I want to make sure you feel confident about our continued partnership. We settled into Hartwell's conference room, which overlooked their main production floor. Through the windows, I could see workers assembling the components Morrison Industries supplied for their flagship product line. Derek mentioned that your father's death might affect our delivery schedules and quality control, David began carefully. He suggested there could be operational disruptions during the leadership change. I opened my presentation folder calmly. David, let me show you exactly what our operational continuity looks like. I pulled out detailed production schedules, quality control reports, and delivery confirmation records covering the past 6 months. As you can see, we've maintained 97% on-time delivery for your account, with 0 quality defects in the past quarter. These metrics actually improved during Dad's illness because I was personally overseeing all Hartwell account operations. David studied the documents with growing interest. You were managing our account directly? For the past year, yes. Derek handled initial client contact, but operational coordination, quality assurance, and delivery scheduling have been my responsibility. I pulled out another set of reports. I also identified several opportunities to optimize your component specifications for better performance and cost efficiency. I'd spent months analyzing Hartwell's requirements, looking for ways to improve value while strengthening our partnership. Derek had never bothered with such detailed account management. What kind of optimization? David asked, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. Your current specifications require premium-grade steel alloy for components that could perform equally well with standard-grade material. Making that adjustment could reduce your costs by 12% while maintaining all performance standards. I pulled out engineering analysis and cost projections I'd prepared months ago, waiting for the right opportunity to present them. Additionally, consolidating your delivery schedule from weekly to bi-weekly shipments could reduce logistics costs for both companies, while actually improving inventory management on your end. David was taking notes now, his initial concern replaced by business interest. Have you discussed these recommendations with Derek? I presented them to my father for approval. Derek wasn't involved in the technical analysis because his expertise is in relationship management rather than operational optimization. It was diplomatic language for pointing out that Derek's contribution to the Hartwell account had been largely ceremonial while I'd been doing the actual work. Grace, I have to say, this level of detail is impressive. Derek's approach has always been more relationship-focused. Derek's client relationship skills have been valuable for maintaining account satisfaction. I agreed. But as CEO, my focus is on delivering measurable value that strengthens our partnerships long-term. I closed the presentation folder and looked directly at David. I want to be completely transparent with you about Morrison Industries' future direction. We're implementing new quality standards, expanding our technical capabilities, and focusing on innovation that helps our clients succeed. I pulled out one final document. This is a partnership development proposal I'd like you to consider. Instead of just being a supplier, we'd like to become a strategic partner in your product development process. The proposal outlined collaborative design services, shared technology resources, and joint efficiency improvements that could benefit both companies. I'd been working on it for months, using the Hartwell account as a model for how Morrison Industries could evolve beyond basic manufacturing. David read through the proposal with growing enthusiasm. This is exactly the kind of supplier relationship we've been looking for. Derek never mentioned anything like this. Derek focuses on maintaining existing relationships. I'm focused on growing them into something more valuable for everyone involved. By the time our meeting ended, David was asking about implementation timelines and requesting follow-up meetings to discuss specific technical details. What had started as Derek's attempt to undermine my client relationships had become an opportunity to significantly expand our most important partnership. As I drove back to the office, I reflected on the irony of Derek's strategy. By forcing me to prove my competence directly to clients, he was actually demonstrating to everyone exactly why Dad had chosen me over him for leadership. Back at the office, I found Derek waiting in my office with an expression that suggested he'd already heard how the Hartwell meeting went. "How did your client relations presentation go?" he asked with false casualness. "Very well, thank you." David was impressed with our operational continuity planning. I settled behind my desk, maintaining eye contact. He's also interested in expanding our partnership through the strategic development proposal I presented. Derek's confident facade cracked slightly. "What strategic development proposal?" "The one I've been working on for 6 months. The collaborative partnership model that could triple our annual revenue from the Hartwell account." Derek was quiet for a long moment, probably realizing that his attempt to sabotage my client relationships had backfired spectacularly. "Grace, I think we need to discuss boundaries regarding client communications. As regional sales director, major account decisions should go through me." I smiled. "Derek, as CEO, I decide how client relationships are managed, and I've decided that Patricia Chen will be taking over primary responsibility for the Hartwell account, given her expertise in strategic partnership development." Derek's face went through several color changes. "You can't just reassign major accounts." "Actually, I can, and I just did." I pulled out Derek's weekly sales report, which had been sitting on my desk all afternoon. "Speaking of account management, your quarterly numbers are 23% below target. We need to discuss performance improvement strategies." Derek stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You've been CEO for 1 week and you're already micromanaging experienced sales staff." "Derek, I'm managing sales staff appropriately for the first time in years." "There's a difference." As he reached the door, I called after him. "Oh, and Derek? David Hartwell asked me to pass along his congratulations on Morrison Industries' new leadership direction. He said he's looking forward to working with someone who understands operational excellence." Derek left without responding, probably to call Melissa and explain how his strategic undermining had turned into my strategic victory. I sat there in Dad's office, surrounded by expansion plans and client development proposals, feeling more confident about my leadership abilities than I'd ever imagined possible. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. "Grace, this is Jennifer Henderson from Henderson Group. I heard about your presentation to David Hartwell, and I'd like to schedule a similar strategic review for our account. When are you available next week?" Word travels fast in business circles, apparently. Derek's attempts to plant doubt were instead creating demand for my direct involvement in client relationships. I opened my calendar, feeling genuinely excited about the opportunities ahead. Dad had always said the best revenge was success. Apparently, the best response to sabotage was simply being excellent at your job. Derek's next strategy became apparent Monday morning when I arrived to find my stepmother Linda sitting in the lobby, clutching her purse like armor and wearing the expression of someone preparing for an unpleasant but necessary conversation. Linda had married Dad 6 years after Mom died, bringing her own complicated relationship with family business dynamics. She'd always been polite to me but clearly favored Derek, probably because he reminded her of the successful business executive she'd thought she was marrying. "Grace, honey," she said, standing as I approached. "Could we have a private conversation? It's about family concerns." Family concerns. Derek had obviously recruited reinforcements for his campaign to undermine my authority. "Of course, Linda. Let's talk in my office." As we settled into the chairs around Dad's conference table, Linda pulled out a handwritten letter I immediately recognized as Derek's handwriting. "Derek asked me to speak with you about some worries the family has regarding your new responsibilities," she began carefully. "We're all concerned that you might be taking on more than you can handle." "What specific concerns?" I asked, though I could probably predict Derek's talking points word for word. "Well, running a company is incredibly stressful, and you've already been through so much with your father's illness and death." Linda's tone was gentle but patronizing. "Derek thinks it might be better for you to take some time to grieve properly before making major career decisions." I smiled. Derek had crafted his message carefully, framed my promotion as impulsive grief behavior rather than Dad's deliberate choice based on demonstrated competence. "Linda, I appreciate the concern, but this wasn't my decision. It was Dad's. He spent years preparing for this transition. But honey, Derek has so much more experience with business operations. He's been working here since college, and he understands the pressures of corporate leadership." I pulled out the quarterly performance reports I'd been reviewing that morning. "Linda, let me show you Derek's business experience in concrete terms." I opened the folder to display sales figures, client retention rates, and operational metrics covering Derek's entire employment history. Derek's sales numbers have consistently ranked in the bottom third of our regional performance metrics. His client retention rate is 68%, compared to the industry standard of 85%. And in 8 years, he's generated exactly 0 new business relationships. Linda looked confused, as if these numbers didn't align with the narrative Derek had been feeding the family. But he's always talking about important client meetings and strategic business decisions, she protested. Derek talks about business well, I agreed. But talking about work and actually doing work effectively are different skills. I pulled out another document. This is the operational analysis I completed last month, identifying 15 areas for cost reduction and efficiency improvement. Implementation of just 5 recommendations has already saved us $60,000 this quarter. Linda studied the document with growing surprise. You did this analysis? I've been doing detailed business analysis for 3 years, Linda. Derek dismissed it as busy work, but Dad was using it to evaluate leadership capabilities. I could see Linda beginning to understand that Derek's version of family dynamics might not reflect actual professional competence. Derek also mentioned concerns about employee morale. She continued, though less confidently than before. He said people are uncertain about working for someone so young and inexperienced. I smiled. Would you like to hear what employees actually think about the transition? I picked up my phone and called Sandra at the front desk. Sandra, could you ask Patricia Chen and Tom Rodriguez to join us in my office for a few minutes? While we waited, I explained to Linda how Derek's management style had created frustration among employees who felt undervalued and excluded from decision-making processes. Patricia and Tom arrived within minutes, both looking curious about the impromptu meeting. Linda, I'd like you to meet Patricia Chen, our new senior sales manager, and Tom Rodriguez, our head of manufacturing. Patricia, Tom, this is my stepmother, Linda. She's interested in hearing about employee perspectives on the company transition. Patricia and Tom exchanged glances, clearly understanding they were being asked to provide honest feedback about leadership changes. Mrs. Morrison, Patricia began, I can't tell you how excited employees are about Grace's promotion. In 1 week, she's addressed compensation concerns, implemented communication improvements, and created advancement opportunities that we'd been hoping for years. Tom nodded enthusiastically. For the first time in my 5 years here, I feel like management understands operational challenges and actually listens to solutions. Grace has been working directly with production staff to identify efficiency improvements. Linda looked genuinely surprised. Derek said employees were concerned about inexperienced leadership. Patricia and Tom exchanged another glance, this one more pointed. Ma'am, Tom said diplomatically, Derek's approach to employee relations has been limited. He's never spent time on the production floor or asked for input about operational issues. Grace knows our names, our concerns, our suggestions for improvement. After Patricia and Tom left, Linda sat quietly for several minutes, processing information that clearly contradicted everything Derek had told her. Grace, I had no idea you were so involved in business operations. Derek never thought it was important enough to mention, I replied gently. He saw me as Dad's assistant rather than Dad's protege. Linda folded Derek's letter carefully, her expression thoughtful. I came here planning to suggest that you step back and let Derek handle the company transition. And now? Now I'm wondering why Derek didn't mention any of your qualifications or achievements. She looked directly at me. I'm also wondering if I've been getting accurate information about family business matters. I walked around the desk and sat in the chair beside her, the way Dad used to do when he wanted to have serious conversations. Linda, Derek isn't malicious. He's just been told his entire life that he was the natural heir to Dad's business. Learning that competence matters more than birth order has been a difficult adjustment. Linda nodded slowly. Your father always said the company would go to the person best qualified to run it. I assumed that meant Derek, because he's older and has been working here longer. Dad assumed that too, initially, but he spent 3 years evaluating our actual capabilities before making his decision. Linda stood up, her purse no longer clutched defensively. Grace, I owe you an apology. I came here with preconceived notions based on incomplete information. You came here because you care about family harmony, I corrected. That's admirable, even when the information you received wasn't entirely accurate. As Linda prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Grace, what should I tell Derek about this conversation? Tell him that his family supports him, but that professional competence and family love are separate issues. He can be a valued family member and a productive employee without being CEO. After Linda left, I sat in Dad's chair thinking about the complex dynamics of family-business relationships. Derek's attempts to recruit allies were actually helping people understand why Dad had made the choice he did. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Linda. "Thank you for being patient with an old woman's concerns. Your father chose well." Derek's campaign to undermine my authority was systematically backfiring, but I suspected he had one more strategy up his sleeve. Someone as competitive as my brother wouldn't give up easily, especially when his professional identity was crumbling in real time. I was right. Derek's final attempt to reclaim control would come within the week, and it would be the most desperate move yet. The crisis came Tuesday morning in the form of a panicked call from Tom Rodriguez at 6:30 a.m. I was still in my pajamas, drinking coffee and reviewing client reports, when my phone rang. "Grace, you need to get down here immediately." Tom's voice was tight with stress. "We've got a major problem with the Hartwell shipment." I threw on clothes and drove to the office with my heart pounding. The Hartwell account represented 30% of our quarterly revenue. Any significant problem could devastate our financial position and destroy the client relationship I'd just strengthened. I arrived to find Tom, Patricia, and 2 production supervisors clustered around a massive pile of rejected components in our shipping bay. Every piece showed the same defect: precision holes drilled in the wrong locations, rendering thousands of dollars worth of product completely unusable. "What happened?" I asked, examining one of the defective pieces. "Someone changed the drilling specifications on the production order," Tom explained, his face grim. "The dimensions were altered by exactly 2 millimeters, enough to make every component incompatible with Hartwell's assembly process." Patricia held up the modified production order, her expression a mixture of anger and disbelief. "The change was authorized yesterday afternoon, after the production run had already started. Someone literally stopped the process to implement new specifications." I studied the authorization signature on the production order, Derek's name clear and unmistakable. "Where's Derek?" I asked quietly. "He's not in yet," Tom replied. "Production called his cell phone multiple times, but he's not answering." I pulled out my phone and tried Derek's number, straight to voicemail. His house phone rang without answer. Even Melissa's cell went unanswered. "How much product is affected?" Tom's expression was grim. 8,000 components, $47,000 worth of materials plus production costs. And Hartwell needs delivery by Friday for their assembly schedule. The magnitude of the disaster was staggering. Not only had Derek destroyed nearly $50,000 worth of finished product, but his sabotage threatened our most important client relationship and our quarterly financial targets. "Can we reproduce the order with correct specifications?" "Not by Friday," Tom said. "We'd need at least 10 days to source materials and complete production." Patricia was studying the modified production order with increasing suspicion. "Grace, this doesn't make sense as an accident. Derek signed this authorization at 4:30 p.m. yesterday. Production had already confirmed the original specifications that morning." I looked around the shipping bay at the piles of useless components, feeling a cold fury building in my chest. Derek hadn't just made a mistake. He deliberately sabotaged our biggest account to create a crisis that would undermine my leadership. "Tom, what's the fastest possible timeline for replacement production?" "If we work around the clock and expedite material delivery, maybe 8 days. But that's assuming no other complications." "Do it. Whatever overtime costs, whatever expedited shipping charges, whatever it takes." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling David Hartwell to explain the situation." The conversation with David was brutal but necessary. I explained the production error, accepted full responsibility, and outlined our recovery plan, including expedited replacement production and temporary alternative sourcing to minimize his assembly delays. "Grace, this is exactly the kind of operational disruption Derek warned me about," David said, his voice carefully controlled. "How can you guarantee this won't happen again?" "Because I'm implementing new quality control protocols that require dual authorization for any specification changes, and I'm personally overseeing all Hartwell account operations until we've demonstrated consistent reliability." It was damage control, not victory, but at least David agreed to give us the chance to recover, rather than terminating the contract immediately. After hanging up, I found Patricia and Tom watching me with expressions that suggested they understood the full implications of Derek's sabotage. "This was deliberate," Patricia said quietly. "Derek knew exactly what changing those specifications would do to the production run." "Probably," I agreed. "But proving intent doesn't fix the immediate problem. We need to focus on recovery first, consequences second." I spent the next 4 hours coordinating emergency production scheduling, expedited material sourcing, and client communication. By lunchtime, We had a comprehensive recovery plan that would cost us nearly $20,000 in overtime and expedited charges, but would deliver replacement components within 8 days. Derek finally appeared at 2 p.m., walking into my office with an expression of carefully crafted concern. "Grace, I heard about the production problem with the Hartwell order. What a disaster. How did something like that happen?" His performance was masterful. Just the right mix of surprise, sympathy, and subtle implication that inexperienced leadership had created operational chaos. "Derek, you authorized the specification change that caused the problem." I held up the production order with his signature clearly visible. Derek's expression shifted to confused innocence. "What specification change? I haven't reviewed any Hartwell production orders recently." It was a bold lie, delivered with the confidence of someone who thought he could gaslight his way out of documented sabotage. I opened my laptop and pulled up the electronic production system logs. "According to our database, you accessed the Hartwell order specifications at 4:28 p.m. yesterday and submitted modification requests at 4:31 p.m. Derek leaned forward to examine the screen, his confident expression beginning to crack. "That's impossible. I left the office at 3:30 yesterday for a dentist appointment." "Interesting. Because your keycard logged you into the building at 4:15 p.m., and security cameras show you entering the production office at 4:25 p.m. I pulled up the security footage on another screen. Clear video of Derek entering the production area, accessing the computer terminal, and spending several minutes modifying the Hartwell specifications. Derek watched the footage in silence, probably calculating whether he could claim his access credentials had been stolen or misused by someone else. "Derek," I said quietly, "did you deliberately sabotage the Hartwell order to create a crisis that would make me look incompetent?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire Derek had set but couldn't control. "Grace, you're being paranoid. Why would I sabotage company operations? Because you're desperate to prove I'm not qualified for this position, even if it means destroying Dad's company in the process." Derek's careful mask finally slipped, revealing the desperate anger underneath. "You're not qualified. You've been CEO for 2 weeks and you're already micromanaging experienced staff, reassigning major accounts, making strategic decisions without consulting anyone with actual business experience." "Derek, I'm consulting people with actual business experience. You're just not one of them." The brutality of that statement hit Derek like a physical blow. He sat there absorbing the reality that his sabotage had failed, and his professional competence had been definitively disproven. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now you resign immediately, or I fire you for sabotage and ensure you never work in this industry again." Derek's face went through several color changes as he processed his limited options. "And if I resign? You'll receive standard severance, positive employment references for non-technical positions, and the family relationships remain intact. But your involvement with Morrison Industries ends today." Derek stood up slowly, his confidence finally completely shattered. "Dad would be ashamed of how you're treating family. Dad would be furious that you tried to destroy his company to satisfy your ego," I replied evenly. "He'd also be proud that I'm strong enough to protect what he built, even from family members who don't deserve to be part of it." Derek left without another word, probably to explain to Melissa how his final desperate strategy had backfired more spectacularly than anything he'd attempted before. I sat alone in Dad's office, surrounded by crisis recovery plans and damage control strategies, feeling exhausted but finally confident that the worst was over. The real work of running Morrison Industries could finally begin. 6 months later, I was reviewing quarterly reports that showed Morrison Industries' best financial performance in 5 years when Sandra buzzed my intercom. "Grace, there's someone here to see you without an appointment. Says it's urgent family business." I looked up from the profit margins that had exceeded projections by 18%, wondering what new crisis required immediate attention. Through my office window, I could see Derek in the lobby, wearing a suit I didn't recognize and carrying a manila folder that suggested official business rather than family drama. "Send him in," I told Sandra, curious about what had brought my brother back to Morrison Industries after 6 months of complete silence. Derek entered my office with an expression I'd never seen before. Humble, almost apologetic, completely devoid of his usual aggressive confidence. The change was so dramatic, I wondered if he'd been taking medication for anxiety or depression. "Grace, thank you for seeing me without notice." He settled into the chair across from my desk, his posture careful and respectful. "I know I don't have any right to ask for your time. Your family, Derek. That hasn't changed, even though your employment status has." Derek nodded, his eyes focused on the folder in his lap rather than meeting my gaze directly. "I came to apologize. Formally, completely. without any reservations or excuses. This was unexpected. The Derek I knew had never apologized for anything more serious than being late for dinner. I spent the last 6 months in therapy, he continued, working through some difficult truths about my behavior, my motivations, and my relationship with Dad's business. He opened the manila folder and pulled out what looked like a handwritten letter. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that I'd been operating from a place of entitlement rather than earning my position through competence. I convinced myself that inheritance was about genetics rather than capability, exactly like Dad warned against in his video testimony. Derek's voice was steady but quiet, as if he were reciting lessons he'd learned through painful self-examination. The sabotage, the attempts to undermine your authority, the lies I told Linda and other family members, all of it came from panic that I wasn't actually qualified for the role I'd assumed was automatically mine. I listened without interrupting, recognizing this as probably the most honest conversation Derek and I had ever attempted. I also came to give you this, Derek said, extending the handwritten letter. It's a formal recommendation letter for your leadership of Morrison Industries. I sent copies to every board member, major client, and business associate who might have heard my previous complaints about the transition. I took the letter and read Derek's detailed account of my qualifications, his acknowledgement of his own professional shortcomings, and his unqualified endorsement of my leadership capabilities. It was thorough, was specific, and completely contrary to everything he'd said during our corporate battles. Derek, this is comprehensive. What prompted you to write this? Dad's accountant called me last month about some estate paperwork. During our conversation, he mentioned that Dad had been documenting my work performance for 3 years. Not just yours. Derek's expression was pained. Dad had detailed records of every mistake I'd made, every client I'd lost, every operational decision that had cost the company money. He'd been building a case against my leadership capabilities while simultaneously documenting your qualifications. I wasn't surprised that Dad had been systematic about evaluating our respective competencies, but I was surprised Derek had learned about it. The accountant also told me that Dad had been hoping I'd recognize my limitations and choose to support you voluntarily. The inheritance structure was his backup plan for protecting the company when I failed to demonstrate the wisdom he'd hoped I'd develop. Derek looked directly at me for the first time since entering my office. Grace, I failed every test Dad designed. Not just the business performance metrics, but the character assessments about how I'd handle family responsibility. What are you going to do now? I asked. Derek pulled out another document from his folder. I've been accepted to the Executive Development Program at Chicago Business Institute. 2 years of intensive training in actual business management, not just relationship maintenance. I looked at the acceptance letter with genuine surprise. The Chicago Business Institute was known for rigorous programs that transformed underperforming executives into competent business leaders. The goal is to develop real management skills rather than just inheriting positions I haven't earned, Derek continued. If I complete the program successfully, I'd like to apply for an entry-level management position somewhere that evaluates merit rather than family connections. Not at Morrison Industries? Derek shook his head. I need to prove myself independently before I could ever ask to work with you again. And honestly, you've built something here that's too important for me to disrupt with family baggage. I looked around my office at the evidence of 6 months of successful leadership, expanded client relationships, improved employee satisfaction, financial performance that exceeded Dad's best years, and operational improvements that were becoming industry models. Derek, I want you to know that Dad never wanted to exclude you from the business. He wanted you to be qualified to contribute meaningfully. I know that now. The therapy helped me understand that Dad's expectations weren't punishment. They were opportunities for growth that I was too arrogant to recognize. Derek stood up, extending his hand for a formal handshake. Grace, I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Dad would be amazed at how you've honored his legacy while making the company stronger than he ever imagined. The handshake felt like closure on years of sibling competition that had been based on false assumptions about inheritance and worthiness. One more thing, Derek said as he reached the door. Melissa wanted me to tell you that she's sorry for supporting my attempts to undermine your authority. She said she's impressed with how you've handled family conflict with more grace than you received. After Derek left, I sat in Dad's chair reading his recommendation letter and thinking about the complex dynamics of family-business relationships. Derek's journey from entitled heir to humble student represented exactly the kind of character development Dad had been hoping to inspire. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Grace, this is David Hartwell. I wanted to congratulate you on Morrison Industries being selected as Supplier of the Year by the Manufacturing Excellence Association. That partnership development proposal you implemented has become our model for vendor relationships. 6 months ago, Derek had tried to use the Hartwell account to sabotage my leadership. Now that same relationship was generating industry recognition for innovative business practices. Thank you, David. That recognition belongs to our entire team. Actually, Grace, it belongs to leadership that understands the difference between managing operations and truly serving clients. Your father built a good company, but you're transforming it into something exceptional. I hung up the phone feeling grateful for Dad's wisdom in structuring an inheritance based on demonstrated capability rather than automatic entitlement. Derek was finally getting the chance to earn qualifications that inheritance couldn't provide, while I was learning to lead a company that Dad had entrusted to the right person. The best part? Both of us were finally becoming the people Dad had always hoped we could be. 1 year after Dad's death, I stood before the Morrison Industries employees at our annual company meeting, looking out at faces that had become genuinely familiar rather than just professionally recognized. Patricia Chen sat in the front row, now promoted to Vice President of Strategic Development. Tom Rodriguez had been named Director of Operations after implementing efficiency improvements that saved us nearly $200,000. This has been a year of transformation, I began, not just in leadership, but in our understanding of what Morrison Industries can become when we combine Dad's foundational values with innovative approaches to business excellence. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, showing financial performance that exceeded every projection Dad had made for the company's future. Revenue increased 32%, client retention reached 94%, employee satisfaction scores are the highest in company history, and we've been selected as Regional Business of the Year by the Chamber of Commerce. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic, coming from people who had contributed directly to these achievements, rather than just witnessing them. But numbers only tell part of our story, I continued. The real success is reflected in letters like this one. I pulled out a handwritten note I'd received the previous week. This is from Janet Morris in accounting, whose daughter is starting college this fall using scholarship money from our new education assistance program. Janet wrote, "For the first time in my career, I feel like my employer cares about my family's future, not just my productivity." I looked around the room at employees who had been given opportunities for professional development, advancement based on merit rather than seniority, and recognition that reflected their actual contributions. Dad built Morrison Industries on the principle that business success comes from treating people with respect and investing in their potential. This year, we've proven that principle creates measurable results as well as meaningful relationships. The presentation continued with announcements about expanded benefits, new professional development programs, and facility improvements that employees had specifically requested. Every initiative reflected my commitment to building the kind of company people were proud to work for. After the meeting, as employees filed out discussing bonus announcements and promotion opportunities, I found myself alone in the conference room with Dad's portrait, which now hung prominently behind my chair. "We did it, Dad," I whispered to his picture. "The company is stronger, the employees are happier, and even Derek is finally becoming the person you hoped he could be." Derek had successfully completed his first year at Chicago Business Institute, earning recognition for academic excellence and leadership development. His quarterly calls had evolved from stilted family obligation to genuine updates about his progress toward real business competency. My phone buzzed with a text message from Derek. "Saw the quarterly reports in the industry newsletter. Incredibly proud of what you've built. Dad would be amazed." 6 months earlier, Derek had visited the office to meet with some of his former colleagues, apologizing personally for the disruption his behavior had caused, and congratulating them on the company's transformation. Employees who had worked with both of us told me later that Derek seemed like a completely different person, humble, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in learning from their experiences. "Grace?" Sandra appeared in the conference room doorway. "Your 3 o'clock appointment is here." My 3 o'clock was Jennifer Martinez, a business reporter from Regional Commerce magazine, here to interview me for a feature article about successful family business transitions. The article would be published alongside Dad's photo and a retrospective about his 40-year legacy of ethical business practices. "Ms. Morrison," Jennifer said as we settled in my office, "your company's transformation has been remarkable. What would you say was the key to managing such successful leadership transition?" I thought about Dad's letter, about the years of preparation I hadn't recognized, about Derek's journey from entitled heir to dedicated student. The key was understanding that leadership isn't inherited. It's earned through demonstrated competence, commitment to values, and genuine care for the people who make success possible. Jennifer took notes as I explained how Dad had structured the inheritance to ensure the company's future, rather than simply maintaining family tradition. What's your advice for other family businesses facing generational transition? Evaluate capabilities honestly, provide opportunities for growth, and make decisions based on who's best qualified to honor the legacy while building for the future. Family love and business competence are separate considerations that need to be balanced thoughtfully. As the interview concluded, Jennifer asked one final question. Do you ever regret the conflict that transition created within your family? I looked around my office at the evidence of successful leadership: financial reports, employee recognition awards, client appreciation letters, and expansion plans that would create jobs for 40 new employees. I regret that conflict was necessary, but I'm grateful for the outcome. Derek is becoming the business leader he always had the potential to be. Our employees have opportunities they never had before, and Dad's company is stronger than he ever imagined possible. That evening, I sat in Dad's study at home, reading the final letter he'd left for me, marked "to be opened 1 year after inheritance." "My dearest Grace," it began, "if you're reading this, then you've successfully navigated the most challenging year of professional and personal growth imaginable. You've proven not just to others, but to yourself, that leadership comes from character rather than circumstance." The letter continued with specific observations about challenges I'd face, predictions about Derek's eventual growth, and confidence in my ability to transform Morrison Industries into something beyond his original vision. "You were never the backup plan, Grace. You were always the plan. I just needed time to help you recognize capabilities you'd been hiding from a world that didn't appreciate them properly." The final paragraph brought tears to my eyes. "I'm proud of the leader you've become, proud of the woman you've always been, and confident that Morrison Industries will thrive for generations because you understood that the greatest inheritance isn't money or position. It's the wisdom to use both in service of something larger than yourself." I closed the letter and walked to the window overlooking the garden Mom had planted 20 years ago. Dad had maintained it carefully after her death, understanding that some legacies require daily tending to flourish. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: expansion planning, employee development, strategic decisions that would shape the company's future. But tonight, I felt complete peace about the path that had led me from underestimated daughter to confident CEO. Dad had given me more than a company. He'd given me the chance to discover who I was capable of becoming when someone finally believed I was extraordinary. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of family drama, business success, and the sweet satisfaction of proving everyone wrong through sheer competence and determination. Because sometimes, the best revenge really is living well and leading better than anyone thought possible. The inheritance Derek thought he was signing for that day turned out to be exactly what both of us needed, just not in the way either of us expected. And Dad? He'd orchestrated the perfect ending from the very beginning.